to understand, adapt, evolve with all of these different languages and applications?
So yeah, that's a great question. So there's two things here. First of all, what really matters here is making a developer's life as easy as possible. So the absolute focus has to be how easy and simple can it be, right? How can I automate things? How can I glue your components together? And I think every good platform out there, and there's a lot of them, understand that. I think there's something bigger going on where there's a lot of hard pieces of work that have to be achieved in order not just to make the initial deployment step easy, but to automate things like monitoring, scaling, security. These are problems. These are big problems that every single platform has to solve. And I think there's a massive advantage when you're solving it once for all the components, right? Securing Ruby, securing PHP, securing Java. Some of these things are different, but a lot of them are the same. And so really you have economies of scale in the amount of engineering invested, and the net result is you deliver something better, something more robust that just works.
So you mentioned that if something breaks in the middle of the night, that you guys will fix it. That sounds very appealing because stuff will break in the middle of the night. So can you tell me how you guys actually, what actually do you cover in that case? And because there are many cases where things will need to be escalated to the application provider, like they wrote some process that's doing something really malicious or very, poorly performing. So what sort of things do you actually cover in your kind of network operations center?
So, well, first of all, I think since we're talking about EBS, something obviously everyone I think has in mind is the recent AWS outage that was related to EBS. I think as people realize infrastructure is not invulnerable, things break all the time underneath you. It's the platform's job to design for failure, right? And in the case of databases, for example, which is most affected by EBS, since you can't rely on a magical network store that just works all the time, and as we've just found out, it's the database's job to be architected for resiliency, for scaling. So you need, for each type of database, a specific setup that implements the best possible best practice to scale and make that database reliable. So in short, it's our job to detect when the underlying pieces fail and route around that. So there are a lot of technical details to that. I think the key takeaway is if we don't do it for you, someone in your organization is going to have to do it. And that takes resources, it takes time and money.
So if one of my master databases dies, goes off the network, will DotCloud take care of that?
Yes, that's exactly what we do.
Okay. And other things too?
Well,
I mean, other than server failures. So,
yeah.
Because there's a whole host of different types of problems you can run into, right?
Yeah, so again, we work our way backwards from the developer's perspective, which is, if it's not writing code, it's not my problem.
Right.
And so you can be talking about the failure of a node in the infrastructure provider. You can be talking about network partition. You can be talking about security. A security vulnerability has just been discovered, and you have to roll it out. There is a whole list of things that your ops team has to do, and the goal is to take care of all of them. And so I'm happy to talk in detail about how we implement each one of them. In the case of database resilience, the right way to do it is to organize that at the database, at the application layer, at the platform layer, and not rely on the infrastructure being invincible.
Okay.
The question I would have for you is, obviously you're targeting developers, those of us that may already have a large system team. Mm-hmm. What's the perspective those guys have as you talk to companies? Are you replacing their job? Are you making it 10 times easier so they're on the golf course? What's their reaction? We know developers would love that because they get the control, but we're not all set up that way.
I think the reaction is definitely not that we're taking any jobs. The reaction is mostly that we take care of the really annoying part, and we really enable an ops team to worry more about what matters, right? And so the number one worry, the number one concern from the operations team is, well, okay, these developers are happy, they're productive, whatever, but
That's not the number one concern for ops guys.
Exactly. The number one, there's a lot of concerns, but one concern that comes back a lot is, well, there are changes happening in my system. How can I see what's going on? How can I vet them? How do I make sure they're compliant? And so what we're doing is we're building a dashboard specifically for the ops team. And I think that's really the key to unlocking the cloud, really. The potential of the cloud is developers and operations working together instead of being separate and a big wall in between the two. So that's what we're trying to enable.
So platforms and platform as a service is relatively new, right? I mean, there's been a lot of money going into it and a lot of great companies. Where do you see it going, and where do you see DotCloud going in like 2-3 years? I mean, as infrastructure providers mature, I mean, as you know, all you have to do is look at what Amazon's developing, spitting out which is blurring the lines. And I want to say, where do you see the industry of platform and service players or platforms and DotCloud?
I think, well, there's definitely a large-scale trend going on, right? And there's a lot of convergence. I think the main trend I'm seeing is openness. If you're creating software, if you're a developer, really, it's all about freedom to choose exactly what you need. And that means on the infrastructure side, it means on the software component side. Really what platform is a thin layer that makes that choice possible, right? And so it's all about figuring out what's the right level of abstraction. How do you expose that choice in a way that makes developers as productive as possible without removing choice? So it's all about the right line of abstraction. And I think infrastructure as a service is a business. Right? Providing software components for developers is another business. And we're in the business of making these things work together.
Do you think that enterprises, small businesses are going to adapt to that? Or where do you think? Another way of asking this is, who's your target customer, and how's that going to evolve? To gentlemen to my left, and they're huge organizations and everywhere in between.
So what's really interesting is we're obviously we spend a lot of time interacting with our beta users and our first customers, and there are several groups emerging. We're seeing a lot of individual developers that just take on a new project. We're seeing a lot of consulting firms, freelancers, people that like the idea of reusing the same stack over and over again without wasting time. We're seeing developers inside larger enterprises, right, that also have the same need of going fast, having choice, et cetera. I think what's really interesting in the enterprise space is you've got this conflict you've got a lot of friction going on. Right? You've got existing legacy applications, sometimes that no one really wants to touch. At the same time, you've got pressure to go fast on new projects, to go in all directions. And so you've got really a tension of, how do I keep things running? Because really, if it breaks, it's my fault. And how do I deliver on going fast and keeping up with competition? And that's the friction we have to solve, right? And again, the key is really enabling the IT teams, operations, to work together with developers in one uniform process without slowing things down.
Very good. Thank you, Solomon.
Thank you.
All right, Andrew, you're next up. Tell us about PhoneGap.